Well, good morning. I'm Yazzie Moore. I'm a CMF trustee and the director of the Michigan programs at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. Through our racial equity and healing efforts, we have partners who are working to revive and preserve indigenous cultures and languages and expand early learning and care opportunities for indigenous children and more. At the Kellogg Foundation, our efforts and investments are guided by a vision and belief that all children deserve an equitable opportunity to grow, learn, and thrive. And central to this work is a commitment and dedication to racial equity and racial healing that both recognizes the truth of our history and calls us to act and address racism, which impacts us all, especially our children, and prevents us in our country from truly living up to our ideals of opportunity and equality. I'm honored to be here this morning to introduce Edgar Villanueva, whose work has helped to eliminate the history of wealth and racism in our nation with insights that name past and present harms of philanthropy while calling us into an orientation towards justice with a hope for the future. He's the author of the book, Decolonizing Wealth, Indigenous Wisdom to Heal Divides and Restore Balance, a must-see for everyone in our sector, and an enrolled member of the Lumbee tribe. In 2019, he founded Liberated Capital, a participatory grant-making fund that invites individuals and organizations to give through a reparations model that trusts and supports the leadership of those most impacted by historical and systemic racism. Today, he'll be joined in the conversation by CMF President and CEO Kyle Caldwell, and they will be holding plenty of time for questions in the end. So please know we'll be coming around for you for the Q&A at the end. Please join me in welcoming Kyle and Edgar to the stage.
Thank you, sir. Well, good morning.
Good morning.
It's a pleasure to have you here, Edgar. It's a pleasure to have your wisdom and life experience as we kind of talk about this subject. As I mentioned to you earlier, we've been on this equity journey for a number of years, and now understanding how philanthropy can think about origins of wealth and how we should be thinking about our work. I'm wondering, when did you first kind of understand the interconnectedness between race and wealth and philanthropy, and give us a little sense of how you started on this journey?
Sure. So I've been working in philanthropy for 20 years, which I know it's hard to believe that by looking at me, and so I became pretty aware early on. I'm Native American from North Carolina, and I was working at a grant maker, a health foundation there when I started, pretty young at 28 years old. And so not only did I realize I was pretty young to be in the sector at that time, there weren't a lot of folks from my community in the sector. I feel like I could count maybe on my fingers like how many Native American folks I knew back then in the sector. It's changed quite a bit. But not only did I see sort of in the profession of grant making a lack of diversity, but also in the work that we were doing, I just noticed that there wasn't a lot of diversity in who we were funding. And coming from community and wanting to direct resources in a different way, there were a lot of barriers to doing that with sort of mindsets that we use to block, and barriers that we put in place through our processes that restrict the resources going to communities, often to organizations led by people of color. And so I held this conflict early on that, well, you know, I'm sitting in this ivory tower, I have this, you know, multi-million-dollar portfolio. There's not a lot of diversity in the types of organizations and the people that we're funding. And when I began to ask questions or push on that a little bit, there was a lot of resistance. And in fact, I think I tell the story in the book, but one day in the boardroom, I kind of got put in my place. And I was a rebellious young person. You know, I didn't go into the boardroom with my fist in the air. You know, I played by the rules. You know, I did all the due diligence and everything that one will do to bring a grant to the board. And one day I pushed a little bit more, and I was like, well, just explain to me why, because our mission says this, and this feels like a really inappropriate group that we should take this chance on and push. And someone in that room told me that I needed to, that I was getting too big for my britches. And if you're from down south, being too big for your britches is not a nice thing to say to a person. It means that you need to, you're speaking above your pay grade, you're exercising too much power, you need to remember your place and sit down and be quiet. So that began for me, like, that was a very embarrassing moment, but I began to really explore, like, what's really going on behind all the good that we do and all these resources and the impact we have in community. Why is it that we will not go a little further to try to move money where it's really, really needed most, to these places where folks are doing incredible work? And when I began to ask why does that really kind of throw people into this frenzy? And so I knew there was something very sensitive in that space that I wanted to unpack and explore.
When we think about your book, right, Decolonizing Wealth, Indigenous Wisdom to Heal Divides and Restore Balance. First of all, I love the symbolism on the book, right? So you almost have this Wall Street cityscape, and this majestic bird flying through. And in reading your book, there are some key takeaways. I'm sure that this symbolism and the themes that you've lifted up, you want us to take away. Give me one or two that are the key ones for folks who haven't yet had the privilege of reading the book. What are two or three big themes?
Yeah, I think that the book brings the question of where did money come from, and like what is the purpose of philanthropy in a lot of ways, and tries to take us back to some fundamental basic ideas around what it means to be in community and to take care of each other. For me, as a person that's been doing this work for a while, and like a lot of y'all probably at times you're like, oh, do I still want to do this, or this feels hard, or maybe it's not aligning with my values in the way that I had imagined. I went back to my community in North Carolina and spent time with elders there and asked the question, like, what is philanthropy from a cultural point of view? What does it really mean to us? How did we take care of each other before we had this like industry of philanthropy in place? How did we take care of each other? And I wanted to get back to the basics, because philanthropy, y'all know, means like love of mankind or love of humankind. And where is that spirit and that presence in this like industry and the work that we do? And so there's a lot in the book, I would say, that's bringing indigenous ideas of caring for each other and connecting with one another and thinking forward to the 7 generations, how we perceive money and how the flow of money works in our communities that I bring to our industry as ideas that we can embrace. An indigenous worldview, which is not something that we have a monopoly on as Native people, I think is something that's not just good for like philanthropic practice, it's a good way to be as a human being, and a good way to be in community in terms of how we show up in our leadership. So there's a lot of that in there, and it's not just it's not a tear down critique, I hate philanthropy kind of book. I work in this industry and I love it. It's a love letter to this industry, I would say, and an invitation for us to do better because we can.
You kick off with this idea if money could heal us, right? So money is medicine, but yet the whole book is about maybe overdosing and what do we need to do to think about money as medicine. So talk to us about what do you mean by the healing? What does it mean to be healed?
Sure. So when you think about how wealth has been accumulated in this country, our history of colonization, taking of land from indigenous folks, genocide, like all the ways that money has been accumulated here, the result is a lot of trauma, right? Trauma around money, but just trauma in general. Our country is so divided, and you feel that now maybe more than ever. I know I do. It's the most divisive time that I've ever experienced in my life. And A lot of that is because we as a country have not addressed the root issues of a lot of problems, the stains on the soul of our country. This country has never really officially apologized for enslaving black folks. We've never really righted our wrongs that, all the broken treaties. And that history that feels like maybe distant is not that distant. It's still, a lot of things are still happening. And in my community, it's just my grandparents' generation. Like just 50 years ago, some of our communities just got the right to vote. And so we're talking about very recent things. And these traumas and oppressions over the year just really add up to a lot of dysfunction. Many countries have taken on processes to address this. They've had truth and reconciliation processes. We have yet to do that in this country. And so we keep trying to move forward and sweep all of this trauma under the carpet. And so money has a very deep connection to that because colonization and a lot of the oppression was motivated by wealth accumulation. You can't separate the two. And so in this industry of philanthropy where I just read yesterday, I used to say 800 billion, that was the stat 5 years ago when I started doing this work. It's now $1.5 trillion. Like we just keep getting richer as an industry, right? And so when you think about where all that money came from, there's absolutely a connection to history. And so we are wounded. We have a lot of trauma in our families, in our communities as a result of history. And so money, because it has played a role in causing that trauma, I believe it can play a role in helping to heal. Because when we give money back to communities, we think of it as a sacred thing and we move money to where the hurt is the worst, it can help restore. When we think about reparations and reconciliation and all of these things, it's about helping to make whole. And even like moving money back to these communities, it's really, there's no amount of money that can undo what's been done. But it's more than just a symbol of giving money. It can also be a very powerful spiritual representation of like, let's try to come together and make things right. And it's not just about indigenous people or black people or folks who have been harmed, it's about all of us. Because the fact is, colonization in our history has caused trauma for everybody in this room. This is our collective community in our country, and we're all struggling because of this history. So when we begin to address that, we begin to reallocate resources in a way that are more equitable, it helps all of us heal in a very collective way.
You said that the figure that you started out with, 800 billion, and now into the trillions. When you kicked off the book in 2018, that was sort of the baseline. There are other things that have changed since you published the book, and you've been doing road shows, and you've been doing listening tours, and you're doing engagement with family foundations and other organizations. What are the things that you're seeing now over the last 5-6 years that are coming out of that dialogue?
Yeah. Oh God, it's been amazing. I wish you all could have been with me the whole time. Honestly, if I had known that I would see and experience what I have, I would have gotten like a film crew or something, because it's hard to articulate what I've seen. One, in a very positive way, there's some stuff that I put in the book that I never thought anybody would actually do. I just wanted to push our thinking. And I've been really, really amazed at how thoughtful our community is as philanthropy. And there are many folks who are willing to entertain very brave conversations and ask what if. And so very early on, I began to hear from foundations who said, hey, that thing in the book that you said, we're doing that, or we're having that conversation with our board. We want you to come in or whatever. And so I have seen many, many amazing things happen across private foundations, family foundations you mentioned. I'll speak there for a moment. I really have loved working with family foundations because I like to bring in the, I'll say spiritual. I hope that's not a spooky word for folks, but to me, this work is much more than a transactional thing of moving money, right? It's very connected to heart, and when you have a family doing that together, what an amazing opportunity to like not only give together as a family and to think about the legacy of your family through philanthropy, but also all the stuff that we all have in our families. Like it's an opportunity to kind of unsurface things and to have conversations about your family's history and ways to make amends. And I've seen family foundations through this work really come together and be closer to their family members and to heal generational trauma within their families because they are beginning to have real conversations about where this money came from. Because, I mean, money is a thing we don't like to talk about with our families, right? Even those of us who talk about money all day at work with our families, it's like this weird thing. And it can be especially hard for families that have wealth. And so there's something really powerful and transformative. You know, I felt like I was onto something when I wrote the book, but it's been really different to see it in practice and to be with a family for a year and see them really go through the 7 steps of healing. Not only has it transformed their philanthropy, but it's transformed them as people to be able to address some things. And sometimes we have histories in our families where wealth has been accumulated in ways that people may feel ashamed of or feel a sense of guilt. And there's a way to be free from that when you address it, you name and tell the truth, and you find ways to make amends. And a great way to do that is by helping to redistribute or allocate wealth back to communities that maybe were harmed in the process. So it's been a beautiful journey. You know, at the same time, we have new challenges, right? There's always backlash to progress. And so we're experiencing that now in the work where, you know, folks are getting a little timid and shy or resistant to talk about race or talk about racial justice. And it's frightening to me, honestly, in this moment, that in a time where we need to be taking a very strong stand for progress and social justice, that we're seeing a little bit of folks taking a step back from that. And so, yeah, I want to see us be a lot more bold in this industry and unapologetic about what we believe and to stand firmly on the side of social justice. So the fight's not over, you know, it's a step forward, a step back. But in general, I feel very hopeful. I continue to do this work because I'm daily inspired by folks who are really being inspirational in the way they're approaching their work.
So you wrote the book in 2 parts, right? There's the context setting. So I'm going to stay there for a little bit, and then we can go to part 2 where you talk about how do you heal and give us some really concrete steps to do that. But in the context space, I would imagine a lot of learning occurred during the pandemic, where, or, as you pointed out, a lot of organizations sort of led into new ways of doing their work that were releasing the burden on nonprofits and communities and trying to figure out how do we do things different. And now they're, you know, it's like a rubber band, right? The tension might be loosening back. But I'm curious that the conversations that you must have been having at that same time must have given you the opportunity to, like, say, here it is, right? This is it. This is what we're talking about. This is a grand example of the inequities in some of the systems. What was that like to talk to people about the work in the midst of, you know, a century anniversary of a pandemic?
Oh, God, it was so many things. You know, at the time I was living in Brooklyn, less than a block from a hospital where they had put 18-wheeler trucks out there to serve as makeshift morgues. So it was personally, probably like you all, I mean, it was a very frightening time. I think one of the things about that period that I think allowed us to move quickly and to relax our protocols and to just do business in a very different way is for one of the first times in my history on this earth. I think it was a time that we were all impacted by something. You know, like maybe in different ways, maybe disproportionately. But during the pandemic, we were all afraid. We were all impacted. We all lost people that we know and love. And when there is a sense of we're all in this thing together, then there's a way that there's a bridge that is kind of built that pushes back on this us versus them paradigm, or, you know, we're the funder, they're the recipient. We were just all human beings trying to figure out where we're going to get our groceries the next day, you know. And so there was this common sense of humanity that was very, very apparent during that time. And so, yeah, philanthropically, it was like amazing to like move money, and we grew significantly during that time because of our relationship with the Native community. We were helping to get dollars out quickly, and even then, as a intermediary, you know, we weren't asking for applications. We were like, you got an EIN, you get a check, you get a check, you get a check, right? And so it was like, it was phenomenal. And a lot of folks during that time learned about mutual aid, right? And mutual aid is something that's been around. It's something that we practice in our communities and have for a long time. And so it felt for a moment that like we were really in this thing together. And that was the silver lining for me. It was really beautiful to witness that and experience that. And we did come together as sort of a human race and as a people during that time to survive. And so I think that that's an element that is a part of what we talk about in the book and what can be different. The huge divide in all of this is that we don't see that we all have skin in the game and that we're connected and we're codependent. That's a very indigenous worldview thing, right? That we are codependent. We say all my relations because we literally believe that we're related to each other, right? And that your suffering is my suffering, your thriving is my thriving. If we truly, truly believe that, we would go through this in a very different way. Like the types of questions and the due diligence and the rigor of our application processes that we might put folks through. Would you put your sister through that if they were in need and needed money? Probably not, right? You would just like trust them and give them the money and be happy to help them. But so we create this distance for whatever reason that is not serving us well, and it loses the love of humanity or the love of mankind presence in the work that we do. So I hope that we can remember how we did work, and we all survived. The industry is still here. We didn't close down. I think we have all the data we need, and there's whatever, you know, we're still here, and so there's a way that we could do business differently to move money. That great lessons learned from that I hope that we can reflect on and bring forward.
In the interim period between whatever it is that, you know, this post-pandemic or coming, obviously COVID's still out there. There is also other sort of storms out there and pathologies that we're dealing with when we think about misinformation and we think about the spread of polarization and people's inability to sort of see common facts, common problems. How does your work either get redefined, amplified, stymied as we think about polarization and the trust in the sector and some of the other challenges that we're seeing?
Yeah, you know, I think one of the things that's been a successful factor about the work that we do is that you know, I go anywhere to talk to folks that want to have a conversation about this, and I think that even within philanthropy, we pick sides sometimes, and we can be siloed and along the political spectrum, and it's I find that it's really important to create on-ramps into this work for people, or to find ways to build bridges and have conversations. You know, there's a time and place, right? As a Native person, I haven't always felt open to go in a room to talk to certain groups or people, right? Like if your company is actively doing something to harm my community, you know, or your like some group of people is harming my people, I don't have to be open. I don't have to do that work. I can be angry and upset. There's a place for that, and that's okay. But in general, I think that we as philanthropy, you know, have a unique role to play where we can create spaces to try to build some bridges. We're just so divided, and we can't even like have productive conversations with folks who don't agree with us politically. I've experienced a lot, you know, in the last few years. The name of our organization has Decolonizing. I mean, it seems pretty radical and progressive, and we are. Politically, we take very bold stands around issues of justice, but yet that doesn't mean that I can't go into a room or a space where folks want to have a conversation and learn about it. And so I have to do enough of my own work in healing to be okay and strong enough to be in those places so that I can help others heal. If I stay wounded, if I stay angry, if I demonize other folks, then I'm not going to be in a position to have a productive conversation or to help bring people around potentially to my point of view. And so, one thing that I've learned is that wherever, in every organization, in every industry, in every place, there are good people inside of those places trying to do the good work. And so to just demonize a whole swath of, all corporations are bad, or like this industry is bad. There's good people inside places trying to make change. And I know that because I have been one of them. I have felt like I have been that person inside of a beast of an organization where there were other good people, but I knew that I was there inside of an organization, inside the belly of the beast, so to speak, trying to change things from within. And that's a special calling. I think change happens there's an inside game and an outside game, and we have folks who are ringing the alarm and doing community organizing and calling people out and doing all of that. And there's a role for that, but there's also a unique role for us who are inside of institutions and places to try to make change. And so it's, I come from a community and a place where like I have people in my family from all, who crosses a political spectrum and like more conservative leaning. I have folks who are, that I love who believe very differently from me, and I know that they're good people, and I don't water down my politics or excuse anything or accept behaviors or actions that are harming people, but I have to at least be able to sit down and see them as a person. In order to have a productive conversation or to really understand where they're coming from. Of course, my end game is I want to change their mind and bring them around to my point of view because I'm right? But the effective strategy is not to, there's an effective way to do that. And so, yeah, I think about this a lot. I go into places sometimes to talk or do work where I've had some of my progressive friends say, I can't believe you're working with them, that you're going in there. Do you know what they've done? Wherever there's money and power, I will show up and have this conversation. And at the same time, I've done work that some of my conservative friends are like, why are you doing that? That's too radical. And so it's, I'm not that absolute. I think there's a lot of in between. And, one quick example, my organization started the very first national fund in this country to support reparations for Black people. Reparations is a very interesting, dynamic subject where folks have a lot of opinions about it. And I bet the fact that I said the word reparations right now, some of y'all probably did like this, right? And so, to be able to build knowledge and awareness around what reparations is, we started that as the only funder. Now more than 80 foundations have invested in this movement. How do we accomplish that? I had to have a lot of conversations with rich white people and large institutions about the opportunity to pay reparations to Black people and what that would mean for white people, right? That there's actually something in that for all of us if we make amends and we do right by this community, what that could mean for our country. And so there's a way to approach bringing people into our issues or finding space for them in the work that we're doing. That is just effective community organizing and effective selling. Read Andrew Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People to Your Way of Thinking. I mean, it's like basic things, but also beyond just a strategy, it's just the right thing to do as a human being, because if we are going to move forward, bring this country back together at some point, we have got to find ways to not cancel out folks who are not exactly like us. And again, it's not to tolerate folks who are actively harming folks. Like, we need to deal with that in a different way. But there's a lot of good folks in the middle who are on journeys of learning and understanding. And when it comes to the work of equity, diversity, inclusion, racial justice, and all of that, I remember when I started my own journey in that work, and thank goodness there were folks who were great teachers and had grace for me in my ignorance as I began to do that work myself. And so if we don't allow someone to come up to the table, then they'll never get to eat and share with us. So that's been my sort of philosophy behind it.
I want to ask one more context question before we get to how to heal, and then talking through the many steps that you and your organization, which I hope you'll take that opportunity to explain the organization itself as well. But one more context for many in this room who are dealing with no legal change, no legislative change, but there is a strategy of having philanthropy rethink targeted grant making towards certain populations. The Fearless Fund settlement sort of moves it to maybe a slight back burner, but it's still on the stove. And I'm wondering, when we were talking earlier, that whole dynamic of the sector having to sort of rethink this work. Talk to me about some of the conversations you were saying that you were having with families and having with trustees and organizations as they're thinking about, well, I have several scholarships that are specifically targeted to persons of color. I have programming that's specifically targeted to those conditions. How are you having that conversations in the context of decolonizing well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the fear of legal action is the biggest threat to this work right now, honestly. And it's one, I think that it's no mistake that a fund led by Black women was specifically targeted and singled out. I mean, this is how folks who do not want us to move forward in this country, this is kind of their strategy. They go for the margins and try to make examples out of that. And so that entire situation was completely sort of planned, and there's a lot of strategy behind their approach. And we are falling for their trap. We are literally responding in exactly the way that they thought that we would. And so my invitation is for us is to be smarter, to be awake, and to be unafraid. I think that, to exercise some extra caution, of course, because no one wants to wind up in a big lawsuit, right? And I'm a trustee at a foundation. We've had these conversations quite a bit, and the last thing that we want is to be entangled up in that. But there's a difference between what this small sort of community-based fund had to go through an experience versus the board I sit on, where we have $15 billion, right? Like, we could hire some good lawyers and really try to fight this, and it may come down to that there might have to, maybe we need to engage in more legal action as an industry to really put some money behind what we believe and fight for it. And so that's something that I would love to kind of see there be more of a willingness to do. I think that, yeah, we have to be smart, and maybe there's ways that we reframe things or whatever, but whatever we're doing, we must continue to be steadfast to privilege people of color, communities of color, in getting grant resources. If we don't, then it's just not going to happen automatically. We have to be intentional about making it happen. The fear that I have about sort of switching up our language and those kinds of things is there is some research that shows, especially for Native communities, if we don't see the word Native in your strategy, or there's not a specific call out, then we often don't understand that funding is for us, right? Like, we are a community that has a special relationship with the federal government, and there's always just been kind of Native programs, and so there's just that orientation. And so if you don't do that, then the burden is on you as a grant maker even more to be very explicit about reaching out and building relationships with those communities so that we know that we can access those resources. And so there's different things that we may have to do while we're navigating this. But, for families, I think, I don't know, I mean, families can move money in ways that are not as public, maybe, and maybe don't have the institutional kind of risk things to worry about. And so, I think there's a lot of ways that family foundations can just move in a more nimble way and put your money where you want to put it. And so, one, it's be bold, all the things that I said about institutions, but also it's just the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do when We know that out of the quadrillions of dollars that go out into community from foundations, and only about 8% of grants go to communities of color. That's a huge inequality, and so we have to privilege moving resources to Black and brown communities, and just kind of figure out how to do that. It's not that hard. We make these problems like, oh my God, there's actually an infrastructure now in this sector to move money in ways that did not exist even 10 years ago. There are so many community-led funds led by people from those communities and ways to move money that you can outsource. If you're afraid, then give the money to someone who's not afraid, right? If you're in the boardroom biting your nails and just there are plenty of people who will gladly take those resources and get them to the community for you, including my organization, so call me. So it's not, it is very serious and something, we have very smart people in doing work around this and general counsels who are talking to each other. But it's kind of the age-old struggle that we've had in philanthropy about our risk tolerance and all those kinds of things. And so we're being tested. We're being tested once again around that a little bit more in a very public way. But it's the time where if you're really about this life of equity and you're really serious about justice and you're really serious about wanting to see our country move forward, that you have an opportunity to be a little bit bold. And think about the types of risks we're taking inside these boardrooms versus the type of risks that community folks are taking every single day to do this work. The risk doesn't compare when people are literally putting their lives on the line to do this. So yeah, that's an invitation is to be bold. And but I do think that we need to be thinking about some type of legal strategy, honestly, because that is the way the opposition, so to speak, that is the way that they are coming to shut down a lot of things, not just inside philanthropy, but just human rights and civil rights in general. It's all happening through the courts. And so we as the industry need to have that conversation around what our legal strategy might be to push back and to be able to move money in the way that we want to.
So let's kind of move to the how that you share. And when I first read the book, I was so intrigued to think about it, how you talk about the process that you can go through, anybody can go through, to sort of understand how to decolonize wealth. And it's clearly synonymous with just a grieving process. How do you go through loss? But at the end, you talk about this whole idea of repair, and in fact, you kind of flip the script on philanthropy to say, oh, by the way, all of it's there for you to solve. You don't have to live with this tension. You are actually the ones that can relieve it. So walk us through the grieving process and apology and all the way through the repair to help us understand how we have these conversations.
Sure. So the 7 steps of healing that I outlined are really rooted in indigenous practice and knowledge around restorative justice. And so if you have funded or participated in any type of restorative justice work, there's a lot of things there that may seem familiar that come from our communities. And, this was the hard part of writing the book, honestly, because I can name a million things that we need to do differently in philanthropy, but what is the thing that we really need to do to address this that's transformative beyond making good grants and all of that? Where I went to, what it brought me to was really this process of sort of truth and reconciliation. We are in an era of truth and repair right now, which is so inspirational to me that at the time that our country feels so divided and there's a lot of tension, we're seeing right now these movements around repair really elevate. And there are, within the United States, so well, actually globally, there's a movement for reparations that I mentioned in the Black community that is really growing, and we've seen now in more than 23 cities there are reparation commissions that have been established. The state of California has gone through a process, and a report came out, and there's now bills being considered to fund the recommendations in that report. And so we know that the federal level things are kind of tied up, but we're seeing at the local level beautiful work happening around reparations. We're also seeing truth and reconciliation opportunities happen for Native Americans in this community, where California seems to be leading the way right now. In California, there's a statewide process happening, a 5-year process to address their history, and many other places are looking at that. And there is policy moving at the federal level to create a federal TRC, or Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Why are these things important? Why is it important to look back and to document history, to name these things, and to consider how we move forward? It's super important. Why are books being banned? Why are we changing, fighting for what our kids can learn in the classroom? Because people who don't want us to move forward as a country know that if we actually understand history, that it will like transform our future, right? And so these beautiful movements being led by community to heal in their communities actually are helping us all heal as a country. And so number one, we all need to get behind those movements and understand what's happening and where we can plug in and find healing, because the work of healing our nation currently rests on the backs of Black and Indigenous folks. Like, they are doing the work to repair this country by themselves, and we need to be allies and be supporting that. Now, how does that relate to philanthropy? Beyond community, we've seen this happening in the corporate sector. There's some companies I've worked with. We've seen a lot of institutions come forward and say, hey, like, we've been around for a long time, and we acknowledge that we have done some stuff that is not great for the community. We've made mistakes. We've used our platform to harm. We've used resources here in a way that are not good, and we are sorry for that, and we want to make amends for that. The LA Times is an example I talk about a lot, a newspaper that's been around for over 100 years. The owner of the LA Times wrote an article, acknowledging in the past we used this platform as, to promote propaganda that was racist. We have not been fair in how we've hired journalists in the stories that we've elevated, all of these different things, and we are sorry. And moving forward, this is what we will do differently about it. You cannot do DEI work, you cannot do diversity and equity work that's only looking forward without acknowledging how did you get here in the first place? Like, what is broken that needs to also be repaired? And so when I read that article from the LA Times newspaper, I had such a different, I was like, oh my God, I love the LA Times. I want to read this paper now. I had a lot of respect for this leader because I was like, it was so authentic and real. And so what repair is really about is getting into a right relationship with each other, right? And aren't we all about relationships in philanthropy? Aren't we all about being, and we talk about trust-based, we talk about, proximity, all of these movements that come through our sector. We cannot really get there if we're not also addressing the ways that we as a sector have harmed, right? And so it's about repairing a relationship. And so the 7 steps in there are ways that as an institution of philanthropy, and also, as you said, just even in your own family, anybody can kind of go through these steps. It's acknowledging the truth of what has happened. Where did the money come from? Who was harmed in the process? How do we benefit from policies that were put in place through the years in this country that provided accumulated benefits for some and disadvantages for others, and acknowledging that we have privilege and we have power, and a lot of that came about in ways that caused harm to other communities. If we can say that much and publicly come to terms with that, the amount of respect from community would dramatically increase because they already know, right? We can't show up and pretend that we're all good. And that we've never done anything wrong and we are, coming in to save the day, when community already knows wow, this institution has harmed our community in some ways. So it's about being bringing our humanity into place, saying, hey, listen, I want to be in a good relationship with the community. I want to right any wrongs. I want to acknowledge that, the wealth came from these ways, right? And we're sorry for that. And there is grief involved in that because it's our history is sad, y'all. It is sad. And if you really are opening your heart and your minds to embody what has happened and also how our institution has harmed, it is not fun. It's not light. But that grieving is necessary to process. And we've actually worked with some foundations where we had to bring in like grief counselors because it was really heavy and really hard in situations where maybe the trustee got their money from in a way where people were harmed in certain ways that was just really hard for people to deal with. But on the other side of that, you are then walking and sitting in a place of truth, and you can like really engage with the community in a way that's so much more authentic because you have acknowledged, yeah, we haven't always been perfect. And so let's like listen and be in relationship in a whole different way. And moving forward, when we think about our resources, it's so much more easier to move resources to community when you get to those places because you're in relationship. You have a different type of connection. And so someone doesn't have to come in all day long and like make the case to fund Black people. It's like, no, it's obvious that we should fund Black people because of things that have happened to that community and the reasons that they've been marginalized and from philanthropy historically. And so it's easier to right the wrongs when we're so clear about what's wrong and the role that we've played. And we've all played some role in perpetuating the harms, It's just, it's the way the system is built. It's really, really challenging to do the work of equity sometimes. And a friend of mine describes it like, in the airport where you have the moving sidewalk and you just kind of, well, some people stand there. I'm from New York, so I walk past them, right? But you're just kind of on the moving sidewalk. Doing the work of equity is like turning around on the moving sidewalk and walking the opposite way while the sidewalk is moving this way. Because everything is just designed to keep moving us in one direction. We have to make a conscious choice. We're going to do something different, right? It's going to be hard and it's extra work. Equity is not, you have to change your systems, your practices. You have to make new relationships. You have to own up to some stuff that maybe you haven't always done right. And that is not something that, you wake up feeling like you really want to do sometimes, but it's the right thing to do. And on the other side of that, there is so much joy and liberation and excitement about doing this work. And for the families that I know that we do this work with, there is, I don't know, there's something that feels very transformative within these families. Like they are more connected to each other, more connected to community, more connected to a sense of purpose versus being connected to a bag of money, right? Like, and that identity as a donor, that is like, oh, I'm a donor, so therefore I decide and I choose this and that, and and I review proposals. There's just so much more opportunity in this work to be more than that, but it does require getting into a process of acknowledging our own, holding the mirror up and acknowledging our own shortcomings and where we could have done better as a way to inspire a commitment to do more and be better in the future. So that's what the steps are about. And it's been really beautiful to witness doing this work with foundations around the world. And that's what DWP does. We do have a Liberated Capital, our fund, that's now moved $20 million to Black and Native communities in this country who are doing amazing work around repair and healing and climate. But the part of our work that's not so visible is the work that we are doing with families and institutions around truth and repair and supporting them on their journeys to think differently about, we call it reparative philanthropy. It's really like doing the work to figure out beyond equity, how can we actually support repairing? And when you bring the lens of repair, it brings in the whole element of relationship in a whole new way, because it's not about, oh, we should be funding these communities, let's do that more. Yes, and let's also make amends for all the years that we didn't fund, and there's a lot of liberation for everybody in those types of conversations.
It's powerful. So we're going to open it up to questions in the audience. You'll see CMF staffers have microphones. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. And we've already got one in the back. So while you travel to the mic, want to make sure too that you have a chance to make clear to folks that you're not just talking to philanthropy, you're talking to organizations like ours, that you're trying to work the systems that are supporting this type of work too, right?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, there's work for everybody. There's work for everybody. So absolutely, I think that especially for networks like this, I mean, this is a place where you can, you come together to learn and be inspired by each other. So, we have worked with affinity groups like NCFP, National Center for Family Philanthropy. I know Nick was here. Is Nick still here? And to run cohorts of folks that are interested in doing this work together. So, yeah, I think this is a place where you may be from a foundation where you're the only person or staffer, and so coming here, there's opportunities to have these kind of conversations, and that maybe even within your own institution you can't have yet, right? And so I hope that you will continue to keep this place as a sacred place where you can push each other's thinking, and to have the hard conversations and do this work together and learn from each other, because there's no blueprint for what we're trying to do here. So, this is new territory.
Great. Did I see a question over here?
Good morning. Thank you so much for this conversation. I really appreciate it. My name is Angeline Fraser-Giles. I am with BoardSource, but I'm taking my BoardSource hat off right now. I am also just recently joined the Reparations Education Project, so I really appreciate you and the work that you're doing. My question is, has there been discussion about those in philanthropy creating a fund for the smaller folks who might feel like, okay, this is happening, all these attacks are coming, and as a protection for them if they are sued, so that they don't have to, they can be bold, they can be brave, and they can be fearless without fear of the repercussions that could come if they are sued. Has there been any discussion about that? And would love to talk to you at some point about Reparation Education Project.
Sure. Love Nikichi. So what I know is yes, is the short answer. And the Ford Foundation, I know, made a grant to the Lawyers Committee to provide pro bono legal support to any nonprofit who has questions or gets into a situation. So there may be other funders who have been doing that type of support to provide some cover. And then I don't know of a fund, but I definitely know that there's been some organizing. Susan Batten from APFI, the Association of Black Foundation Executives, has been organizing a cohort of general counsels to really help people understand like what has happened, where we should be cautious, and like the many ways that we don't have anything to worry about and should be bold. I don't know of a pooled fund necessarily, but I do know there's been some funds dedicated to providing legal support if it's needed. But others in the room may know of some resources.
Are there other questions? Right up front.
Thank you so much for your comments and sharing your wealth of knowledge with us this morning. I actually have two questions. The first question is about how you report the success, or where you've made efforts and it hasn't met expectations. How do you report that so that there is good stewardship and mutual learning?
Report to who?
Well, I'm assuming you have stakeholders,
Oh, yeah,
right?
okay,
So
yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is, how do you make the impact of what the work that you're doing, or how do you recommend that people do it beyond, yes, the grant funding, that's start, but then, and what happened then? So I'm just curious if you can share with us some examples of that.
Sure. No, thank you for that. So let's see. So last year it's 5 years that the book has been out, and I wanted to better understand the impact because I have a lot of anecdotal. I travel a lot, and everywhere I go, people are coming up and saying, "Oh my God, my foundation did this," or blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I don't really know like how. I wanted just to be able to like quantify or have more data around that impact beyond all the whispers in my ear, which I love hearing about the impacts in that way. So I hired an external evaluator, and we did a survey and all of that, and the results were pretty profound and inspiring for the ways that we've impacted philanthropy. So we know that through our direct donor advising that we have influenced just under $1 billion new dollars toward racial justice. And so these were people who were not funding racial justice and now move money toward racial justice work. And racial justice, you know, it's our definition for that is pretty broad. It's you know, one funder is specifically saying the money is for like women of color, you know, so it doesn't have to be like movement building necessarily, but money going to communities of color might be a better way to describe it. We also looked at the conversations happening in philanthropy and the adoption of our Repair to Philanthropy framework. It's been widely adopted. And so I'm kind of saying to this work isn't that radical, like it really isn't. And it's, I'm sort of saying this is just best practice now. Like this is effective philanthropy. It is not that radical, but it is, a lot of folks are really taking on the lens of repair. And you know, for some, equity's been a hard sell. I don't fully understand why, but it's, there are folks who still kind of struggle around that. To me, repair is a step further, but there's something about it that people tend to embrace because it invites you into a process and an opportunity to engage and build a relationship. Whereas equity still, I think, in some ways has this connotation that I'm giving up. If I'm giving you ownership, then I'm losing something, right? And in repairing, it's a win-win situation. So we've seen our model and the framework be widely adopted. There are college courses on decolonizing wealth, like a whole ass semester. I'm like, what are y'all talking about? Can I come? So no, it's like, so there's like all kinds of things I discovered. And so definitely like influence a lot of money. That's just what I know about. I mean, we didn't get as many survey responses as I would love, but I just have a little Excel spreadsheet, and when I hear a thing, I go on there and add it, right? But it's the system practices and changes beyond money have also been like really profound. From things around what people are doing with their endowments to increasing spend out, the spend out rate to spending down. We've worked with a couple of foundations who have taken like a piece of their endowment and just given it back to the communities or started community-based funds. So there's a lot, and I try to use the power of storytelling. We're building a new website where I just want to kind of have more stories and case studies on there because that's how we learn as a sector. And the power of the stories matter. And so we're working fast to try to have more of those impacts to share because I know it helps you in your organizing internally. You know, if one foundation is doing it, maybe you can use that as a inspiration to get a conversation started in your institution. So we're thinking about that. To the part of like where we haven't been successful, you know, that's a good question. It's, you know, it's interesting. We haven't experienced like that much pushback. I mean, I think if people invite us in, they kind of know what they're getting, you know. And maybe I just don't get invited to places where people aren't interested. I don't know, but you know, there are challenges. You can get into the work, and you know, I'm thinking of one example with a foundation. They commissioned research on their history, and when a lot of the things came forward, they were like, oh, we don't want to talk about this anymore. It was really hard for them, and there's like a whole book about their founder, and it's not about demonizing the founder or trustee. This is not why we do this work. It is not to shame people, but it is like, okay, well, these things happen, and like, you know, and what can we do to just like make it better or right the wrongs that will actually bring more honor to the family and to the legacy, right? Because just because you don't want to talk about it again, like the community knows, right? So so when you get into when you get to that level of work, people can sometimes make choices to stop or pull out, and that's disappointing if they do. But usually there's a lot of care and support that we provide along the way that people stick with it. We have a sister organization who's doing this work in the UK, mostly with families and individuals. And she literally has a psychologist on her team who is in the room when they're having these conversations, because people, it is heavy. It is heavy. If it's your grandfather we're talking about, you know what I mean? It's really, really personal. And you have to do that with so much care, because again, we're talking about folks, but you know, and human beings and relationships, and so yeah, so that's where it gets really hard, I think. And then in general, I will say, you know, it's I think this overall kind of backlash we're all experiencing, and pushback and not wanting to keep up the fight. I mean, I can't take that as like it's my fault, but I feel a sense of like, you know, it is a big letdown, but I think we're gonna push through it. So, yeah.
I know you had a second question, but I've got to get another person in, so you're going to get the last question because we're just really tight on time. So I think we had a question over here.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, Linda Fowler. I just wrapped up a 3-year initiative with Living Cities where we had 6 cities, and it was called the Year of Reckoning, Undoing Racism. One of those cities was St. Paul, and Mayor Carter had, as part of his Undoing Racism, a inheritance fund, and it was very much about reparations and about home ownership and supporting small businesses that were displaced from the Rondo neighborhood. My question is, have you considered linking philanthropy and public sector leaders like Mayor Carter, who is really, I think, blazing a trail with using public funds to support this work?
Maybe not in the way that you're thinking about it just yet, but our work that we're funding, pulling philanthropic resources together to support communities is all about campaigning and working with local cities and states around reparations. So we have supported, for example, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the CEO there, Rich, is actually on the Reparations Commission for the state of New Jersey. And so we're seeing, as a result of our work and weaving, more of that coming together, but there's a lot of opportunity probably to do more. Love to chat with you about it.
So the book is Decolonizing Wealth. There's a fascinating foreword by Jennifer and Peter Buffett that I would encourage you to also take note of. Edgar, your work is about our common humanity, about our ability to find common ground and maybe unconventional and uncommon solutions, which is the theme of our conference. So I can think of no better way to end this session than to say thank you to Edgar Villanueva, and I would encourage all of us to think about the questions of what does it mean to decolonize wealth and create a sense of equity in our grant making. So Edgar, thank you so much. Please join me in thanking.